This episode is sponsored by Petra Culp. Hello and welcome back to Film Pro Productivity and Success, the podcast that helps film professionals and other creative people, all creative people really, as you know, to live a more focused, effective and happy life. My name is Carter Ferguson and this is episode 120, Procrastination or Laziness. Laziness is the mother of all evils, Sophocles, unquote. In last week's show, which was researched and written by Christina Littleson, I delved into the subject of technology addiction and how to beat it. And if that's something that would be of interest to you, please do go back and check it out. And actually, last week, I don't think I thanked Christina for preparing that episode, so thank you now for that one. Now, today, though, I'm going to be taking on a topic that comes up again and again on social media accounts that support the show. And it's one I find myself in conversations about really quite often. Procrastination is often confused with laziness, and that's what I want to tackle here. But they are very different, or are they? Question mark. I'm not going to end it here. It's a relatively long episode, in fact, because as I got into this, I realised there was a bit more to it than I originally thought. But procrastination basically is an active process. You choose to do something else instead of the task that you know you should be doing, whereas in contrast, laziness suggests apathy, inactivity, and an unwillingness to act at all. Laziness grows on people. It begins in cobwebs and ends in iron chains. Sir Fowell Buxton, unquote. There's not many podcasts, folks, that are quoting from Sir Fowell Buxton. I don't even know who he is, but he's out there and he said that laziness grows on people, it begins in cobwebs and ends in iron chains. It's a great quote, I had to include it. And I wanted to tackle this whole subject as it's something I've struggled with now and again. And actually, as I proceeded to do the episode, and the same could be said about last week's technology addiction episode as well, I found there's a lot more to it than I at first realised. In fact, even as I sit down to create this episode today, I'm allowing myself to get distracted as I go. I've found myself putting things off. And I could have finished it this morning, but I decided to go out for lunch instead. Even though I know that I've got an awful lot to do this week. I want to record at least 4 and hopefully 6 new shows over the next 3 days. But I'm kind of tired after several weeks of fight contracts. And my brain hasn't quite moved into the right gear, as it were, to get these shows done. So I've struggled a little bit with procrastination anyway, but a little bit of laziness along with it perhaps, just to get in front of this mic here today. And I've only started moving on these shows today, in fact, because come this Sunday, I'll have none of them in the bank. I've got one show going out. The show is, it's The Devil's in the Details going out on Sunday, but I've got no others coming up after that. And if I wasn't to start recording now, there would be dead air next week. Also, I completed last week's episode this morning, for your last week's episode, and I feel kind of that I deserve a rest, and that's been holding me back a little bit on getting this one done. And if I was to record only that earlier show and no others, I would be having to pick it all up again next week when again I'll run out of shows. So what's been driving me now is that I want to get back onto my own projects. And I'm not talking here about the podcast here. I'm talking about my own film development slate and some training and editing and things like that. I also want to get a short film shot this year, but at the moment I'm not entirely sure I'm going to be successful in that. Basically, I've put off an awful lot of my own stuff just to deal with raising some finance and this massive glut of fight contracts. I'm a fight coordinator, for those of you that don't know. I know regular listeners do know that, but if you're just dipping in, I coordinate fight sequences for film and television in Scotland, mostly television these days, to be honest, and I'm quite happy with that. Anyway, I've talked about Drive before, incidentally as well, and there's an episode all about it somewhere in the past. I'm not even going to guess what number it is, but there's various episodes there. Go to filmproproductivity.com, have a look down the list that's on the main page, and you'll be able to find that there's images for each one of them. But the struggle is real when it comes down to laziness and procrastination. I realise that, and it's worth doing this episode on it. Procrastination makes easy things hard and hard things harder. Mason Cooley, unquote. So procrastination, as I said a minute ago, involves delaying unnecessarily, whereas laziness involves being voluntarily unwilling to do anything at all. And accordingly, procrastination is not laziness. And it's possible to procrastinate even if you aren't lazy, or to be lazy but not to procrastinate, if that makes sense. For example, someone who wants to work on a project might delay doing so, i.e. to procrastinate, because they don't know where to start, even though they aren't lazy. Alternatively, someone who doesn't want to work hard on a project because they don't want to exert any effort, i.e. because they're lazy, may get started on a project without any delay, i.e. without procrastinating, because of some incentive like payment, for example. And as such, it's wrong to assume that procrastination is just a form of laziness, or that procrastinators are just lazy, or that procrastinators don't care about their tendency to procrastinate. In fact, procrastinators are usually industrious people who are highly motivated to take action and overcome their procrastination. And as such, they often intend to work as hard or harder than non-procrastinators, and may even work harder in practice. That all got very convoluted there, but hopefully I'll be able to explain it better as it goes along. In Procrastination is Not Laziness by David Kane, one person describes their experience with the issue as follows. This is a fairly long quote. I'll mark the end of it with the word unquote. They say, "Let's clear something up. I am not lazy. I have no shortage of energy. I have no interest in lounging on the couch. I don't have TV service. I never wear pajamas all day. Waking up after 7:30 is sleeping for me, even on a Saturday. I actually like working, yet I exhibit a consistent failure to work through my day-to-day tasks, errands, and projects in any manner that could be considered timely. Nearly everything must reach some sort of scary point for me to finally move on it. Like when I waited till the last possible day to submit my lease renewal, having had 3 months of lead time. And in the end, it took about 15 minutes, but evidently I needed to be a day away from losing my home in order to do it," unquote. And that's not dissimilar to what I'm talking about with the podcast. I've only got one episode left. And I could say the same about, I've got a thing here that's come in for Firefly Films Limited, my film company. I need to submit something. And this thing here, the last time I did it last year, it took me 5 minutes. That's been sitting on my desk. That's been sitting on my desk for like a week. And I could just do it, but I haven't done it. Anyway, I'm getting distracted. I need to kind of expand on the procrastination is not laziness and laziness is not procrastination, because procrastination and laziness can also be connected, primarily in cases where people procrastinate, at least in part, due to laziness. For example, if someone repeatedly delays working on tasks simply because they don't want to exert necessary effort, even though they know that this will lead to negative outcomes for them, for example, low quality work, then the person is procrastinating out of laziness and could be characterized as a lazy procrastinator. Procrastination is one of the most common and deadliest of diseases, and its toll on success and happiness is heavy. Wayne Gretzky, unquote. Some people procrastinate due to the prioritization of short-term mood regulation over long-term achievement, in the sense that people procrastinate because they want to feel comfortable in the short term, even if it means that they fail to achieve their long-term goals. I recognise that in myself. And do you know what, actually, just looking back at last week's show, there was this list of questions you had to answer yes or no to in order to realise if you had an addiction. I think I've got like 20 addictions. And all of these addictions to eating or looking at YouTube or looking at my phone or going onto social media, all of these are tremendous options for me when it comes to procrastination. But I digress. Or maybe I don't, because actually a type of procrastination that laziness is particularly associated with is hedonistic procrastination, which involves postponing things voluntarily due to prioritization of enjoyable activities or due to lack of caring. This type of procrastination is contrasted primarily with anxious procrastination, which involves postponing things despite an intention to work on them and despite the awareness that the delay is self-defeating and irrational. And I very much recognise that in myself as well. I know when I'm not doing something that I should be doing it, but I'll push it and continue not doing it. Anyway, this connection doesn't mean that procrastination is always caused by laziness. It means that procrastination can sometimes be caused, at least partially, by laziness, if you get my drift. The problem with waiting until tomorrow is that when it finally arrives, it's called today. Jim Rohn, unquote. Procrastination usually occurs when factors such as anxiety and fear of failure, sometimes fear of success as well, outweigh people's self-control and motivation, and that might also be weakened by issues like exhaustion, tiredness. That's something that certainly affects my ability to take action. And under this psychological framework, laziness is a factor that plays an opposing role to self-control and motivation, similarly to factors such as anxiety. Specifically, the more unwilling someone is to exert effort, the more likely they are to unnecessarily delay exerting it. People may mistakenly assume that someone, including them, is procrastinating due to laziness, when in fact their behaviour is driven by other issues like, as I mentioned a minute ago, exhaustion or apathy or depression, for example. And even in these cases, when people procrastinate to some degree due to laziness, that doesn't mean that laziness is the only or even the main cause of the procrastination. I'm hoping you're following all this. As I say, this became a rabbit hole deep dive for me. I thought this was going to be fairly simple, and it is quite simple to define the differences there, but I felt it worth, throwing some of the bones that I found as I dug into this at you in this longer episode. So procrastination has many other causes beyond laziness, such as task aversion, perfectionism is a big one, anxiety, as I said a minute ago, fear of failure, exhaustion, abstract goals, and far future outcomes is another thing. If it just seems so far away, then what's the point? And that's one of the things that is dealt with by doing something like a 12-week year, that far future outcome thing. And once we can identify what procrastination and laziness are and what possible connections they have to each other, then we can start to find ways of tackling the outcomes, which are, let's face it, in reality the same thing: sloppy, unfinished or incomplete work, unfocused effort, and poor results. To stop procrastinating right now, you need to identify the smallest step that you can take to make progress towards your goals, and try to start with just that tiny step. What is it? I tried to use this quote in another episode and I messed it up, so I had to edit it out. But it's these: you need to fight the tiny battles, the small battles, so you can win the war. So yeah, start with these tiny steps and give yourself permission to make mistakes during the attempt. That is really, really key. I know I've brought that up on several episodes fairly recently. For example, if you need to write an essay, if you need to write a short film, you can decide to start by writing just a single sentence while accepting that it won't be perfect and might even be quite bad at first. What's that quote I keep throwing at it again and again? The first draft of everything is shit. And that's by... Hold on, I'll have to stop and look it up. I've forgotten already. No, actually, I didn't have to look it up. I'm pretty sure it's Hemingway. And if I'm wrong, whatever, but the first draft of everything is shit. That's a good thing to have in mind, knowing that if you can just get something, a vomit draft of whatever you're doing, onto the page, let it be bad, then you can improve it in future revisions. Yes, drafts. And another thing you can do to make things easier to get started, you can make it easier to get started, for example, by preparing everything that you need for your work without yet trying to start the work itself. And also, that'll make it harder for you to procrastinate later on. For example, if you eliminate potential distractions from your environment, you clean your desk, you get things sorted. I am getting rid of all these episodes in order that I can get on with my other work. I'm focusing down on getting these 4 or 6 episodes in the can so that I'll have 4 or 6 weeks ahead of me where I can focus on my own film projects again, as I mentioned earlier. So to overcome procrastination in the long term, though, you should be looking back at my episode on setting up SMART goals, as by setting yourself specific, measurable, achievable, relevant and time-bound tasks, you will be far more likely to achieve them. So please go back to episode 72 to find out more about that one. In fact, I'll just leave it at that. Yeah, go back to episode 72. It's a good episode. It's just SMART goals, SMART, specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. And another thing that you can do is to identify situations where you delay unnecessarily. And by using high-level thinking, like I like to talk about quite often, the art of working on your life and career at the same time that you are living and working in it, use that high-level thinking to figure out how exactly you procrastinate. For example, by browsing social media, or in my case, it's often YouTube I get distracted by, very often, too often that, in fact. Then you can figure out, when you know what the problem is, you can figure out where and when you procrastinate. When is a key thing as well. It's not something you often talk about. When is it you find yourself drifting off? For example, on starting or finishing tasks, it might be where you start to lose interest, or in the morning or the evening, or if you're at home or in your office or working in a coffee shop, you'll start to find out where you work best and where you work worst. And then you can figure out why you procrastinate, and that could be due to perfectionism or fear, anxiety or depression, something like that. And that's your call to action today, to stop yourself and self-assess yourself based on what I've just been talking about there, and then trial some of these techniques that I'm going to give you now to try and get yourself moving again. I don't know how many I've got here. I've grabbed them from a few places, written them down. The first is, and these are just basic productivity techniques, but they hopefully will get you moving again. The first one is to break tasks down into manageable steps. You know, I've done an episode on that as well called How Do You Eat an Elephant? One Bite at a Time. And that's one way to do it. Commit to a tiny first step, like I was talking about a second ago. You know, just commit to doing 2 minutes on something. You might find that you do 10 minutes or 2 hours. You never know. But by starting, you're more likely to continue. You can also give yourself permission to make mistakes and accept that your work is going to be imperfect, as I said. And you can make it easier to do things by preparing everything you need to do in advance. Is that the other thing you can do? You can make tasks more enjoyable by listening to music, for example. I have a fair library of incidental film music, really, which is what I write to, so that it doesn't break in my thoughts with words. I have to really work with music that doesn't have words in it, or I will absolutely tune out of what I'm doing and start listening to whatever the words are in a song. So I've got like incidental film music that I use for that. You can also delay before indulging the impulse to procrastinate by counting to 10 first. So if you think that you're going to procrastinate, count yourself to 10 and just see where your headspace is on that. You can set deadlines. That's part of the SMART system, because by deciding that you'll complete a task by a certain time, you're more likely to get that task done. You can also plan how you will deal with obstacles along the way, like deciding that if X happens, then you're going to do Y, so you can kind of pre-plan that. You can identify and address your fears, for example, by considering what advice you would give to a friend. That's often quite a good thing. You know, I'm fairly good at giving other people advice, but sometimes I have to reframe it in my mind in order to get over it myself. Moving on, though, increasing your motivation by marking streaks of days in which you've achieved your goals. You know, you can actually just start crossing off successful day, successful day, successful day, and you can try and maintain that streak. Increase your energy by taking necessary breaks or going for a walk, not eating the wrong foods, things like that. The wrong foods being foods that make you start to fall asleep and become less interested in what you're doing than a food that will keep you going. You probably, if you put some thought to that, you can identify some of these things. Fast foods are the ones to avoid. You see, the thing about fast food is you think it's only going to it's going to be quicker to get fast food, and therefore you'll have more time to spend on your tasks. But sometimes that fast food will really knock you out, and you won't have as much energy after you've had it. That's something I've noted. Anyway, where's my list? Improve your environment by adding reminders to your goals or just putting things around that inspire you. Use social techniques, emulating a role model. You know, find something that has worked for someone else and emulate that. using time management techniques, of course, like alternating consistently between work and rest. That would be something like the Pomodoro technique, which is excellent. Again, I've done an episode on that. I've got a Pomodoro on my desk, and I've got it to, what would they call it, websites, earmarked, where is it, bookmarked, that's the word I'm looking for, on my desktop so that I can just run them digitally if I want to as well, and I use them quite often. What else have I got? Create starting rituals. That's counting down from 5 to 0. For example, you can start with your best or worst task. The idea is to, in productivity terms, would be to do your most difficult task first, to eat that frog, as it were. That's what it's referred to. You can also, what have I got here? Develop self-efficacy. That's reflecting on your successes. That's not missing out the pat in the back you should give yourself when you have been successful. It's part of the productivity cycle. I've talked about it a lot, but don't just move past your wins. Stop and celebrate them. Develop as well self-compassion by reminding yourself that everyone makes mistakes when things aren't going your way. Treat underlying conditions, for example, ADHD or that addiction to technology. Treat them, deal with them, and that's going to allow you to tackle your tasks much more efficiently. And if you obviously there's just loads and loads more of these things, but there's a fairly blooming long list of things that you could do. What I would say though is that you can use any combination of these techniques that I've described there, but you should start by focusing on the few that seem the most relevant to your situation. And remember too that writing down your plans, you're 42% more likely to succeed. So please write things down. Okay, all of this list will be in the show notes, by the way, if you need to refer to them. Now, I want you to remember that imperfect action is generally better than no action at all. So you'll benefit more from trying to do just some of these things than from getting stuck doing nothing at all. And also, the longer that you delay, the more likely you are to do nothing. So you should start right now, while understanding that you'll probably get some things wrong at first, but that you'll be able to improve your approach over time. And if you feel overwhelmed, just start with the first technique in this section. That's committing. Is that committing to a tiny first step? Is it? Break tasks into manageable steps. That's, eating the elephant. Try the first one and make that work for you until you feel that you're ready to add more of these techniques. And I used a quote in another recent episode, but I think it bears reuse here. Please remember this as you work forward. Failing forward is the ability to get back up after you've been knocked down, learn from your mistake, and move forward in a better direction. John C. Maxwell, unquote. In next week's show, I'll be bringing you another 3 messages from YouTube and TikTok sensation Abo Demi. Please do join me there if you've liked the previous episodes. I think it was episode 106 and episode 96 are also Demi episodes. I really like doing them, so I'm hoping you enjoy that one. It's up next week. But today, though, I'm going to end with some words from Pope Paul VI, who said, "Somebody should tell us, right at the start of our lives, that we are dying. Then we might live life to the limit, every minute of every day. Do it, I say. Whatever you want to do it now. There are only so many tomorrows. Now take control of your own destiny, keep on shooting, and join me next time for Film Pro Productivity and Success." The music that you can hear right now is Adventures by Ihimitsu, and the executive producer for this season is Christopher McPhillips of Artos Digital. You can view the show notes for this episode on the official website, only there, the full show notes at filmproproductivity.com, but you can follow my personal account on Twitter and Instagram at fight_director, or follow the official links on Twitter at filmproprodpod or on Facebook at filmproproductivity. Please support the show, folks, by subscribing, spreading the word, and leaving an awesome review.